Good evening, Holliston, and welcome to the October 4th, 2021 Select Board meeting. We have another full agenda. We're going to take a few things out of order, and I'll keep you updated as we do so, but we're going to start with the town financial policies discussion, and we're joined tonight by the chair of the Finance Committee, Dr. Ken Shada. Ken, nice to see you. We're just going to give him a minute to unmute.
I don't know if he can. He can? Okay. There he is.
Whenever you're ready, Ken, take your time. So we're going to discuss the most current version of our financial policies, which were updated, I believe it was January of 2020, and we're on a schedule to update them every 2 years or so. So we're a little ahead of the game, but the goal is to try to get something done before we go into the budget development process. So that's why we're talking about it at this point in time. So again, we're going to review the financial policies of 2020. We have recommendations from the financial management team. We have recommendations from the finance committee, and the select board has had a chance to review them as well. And we are looking to hear from Dr. Shada on the finance committee recommendations, and we will consider a potential motion to approve a biannual update. So I think, Ken, you're all set?
Yep, I'm all set. I was fighting with Chris on, he kept muting me, I kept unmuting, and so,
Look like you just had an arm wrestle match over there. But
we got it all worked out now. So thank you for inviting me tonight. Overall, I think that the finance committee's has recommended just a small number of changes to the document that was originally furnished to us for review, and primarily that was in two areas. One was there had been a proposal to change the OPEB contribution from $1.5 million to reduce it to $1.25 million, and take the freed up $250,000 and put it towards the pension stabilization fund. And we chose not to support that and recommend instead leaving the $1.5 million and using $250,000 from free cash for the next 2 years to do that. As you know, our free cash can support that pretty easily, and there were a number of reasons for that change. The biggest one being that it improves the, let's see what the right wording would be, the rating agencies. There was concern about the rating agencies and the pension stabilization fund. But in reality, the fact that we can do both without having to steer the funds actually would be more of a positive from the rating agency perspective. Although I like to, kind of make fun of the ratings guys once in a while, they are smart enough to see that when we're just shifting funds around, that there's no real change to what we're putting away. So that was one of our changes that we recommended, was continuing the financing for the OPEB trust at $1.5 million and using $250,000 per year from free cash for the next 2 years into the pension stabilization fund. The other change that we recommended was, if you look at the original draft that was distributed, there was a mention of a 2% capital set aside in that original version. And right now we're at 2.8%. The best financial practices guideline is to put away 3 to 5% for capital allocation every year. So we wanted to, rather than going backwards, to move forward till we get to at least the 3 to 5% range. And I'll say a little bit more about that because I think there's more description needed there. But fundamentally, we're close enough that over the next 2 years, we could get to the 3%. It's not such a significant delta. And the one thing we did clarify, which was something we worked with Travis on, because we had this discussion in the capital subcommittee, when considering the money that's being put aside for capital, there's really a model that we've been looking to implement over the years, and that is that you have an annual capital set aside, but you also will have, as you do debt within the levy limit, you'll have the debt payments associated with potential capital items inside the levy limit as well. So when we talk about the 3 to 5% target, that wasn't to say that the only objective is to raise the capital set aside to 3 to 5%. That's meant to be an aggregate of the set aside plus any ongoing debt payments for inside the levy debt. So the idea that I wanted to clarify, because I don't want it to be viewed as, and the finance committee doesn't want it to be viewed as simply just raising this number to get to 5%. We know that as time goes by, your board is already considering several different projects that may require debt financing. Some of that may be outside the levy limit as debt exclusions, some may be inside the levy limit. But for the things that are inside the levy limit, obviously we wanted to count the debt contribution as part of our capital set aside, since that debt payment would be going to capital. So those are really the only two changes that we recommended of any consequence. There were a couple of other minor adjustments to reflect. Most of that was not substantive. It was just to reflect current financial data. For example, I think the reserve fund said 200,000, but we've been putting away 300,000 for the last decade. So we just changed that from 200 to 300, but that was really no substantive change to what we're actually doing. So that's pretty much the summary.
Did your committee discuss a cannabis stabilization fund policy?
Yes, well, Travis, to be fair, Travis was the one that brought that to us. He mentioned that this was something that your board has been considering. And yes, he mentioned that to us, and we were in favor of his proposal for establishing that.
Okay. So your recommendations as a committee, you voted or at least presented them firmly that the capital outlay should be 3 to 5%.
Yes, as I said, we're at 2.8 right now, so it's a nominal change to get to the 3% over the next 2 years.
And no limit to the capital expenditure fund, no change to put a limit on the balance in the capital expenditure fund.
Right, we didn't change anything with regards to the capital expenditure fund limits. And
about from I think it was 250,000, Ken, on the reserve fund up to 300,000. Yeah,
and again, that's more just to reflect reality, because it's been 315 for the last decade. So, there's no particular reason to go backwards. And so we just said, make it 300, because that's what we've been doing for the longest time. So. And I'm assuming, I don't recall, your committee was okay with the change in the target balance for the general stabilization fund to bump it from 10 to 15%? Yes, yes. To 18%? Yes. Okay. And your committee makes the recommendation that the pension fund should be funded out of free cash for the next 2 years? Yes, and obviously the reason that 2 years was chosen is because we revisit this, as you pointed out, every 2 years. So we'll see where we are in 2 years, as we do every time, and then go for the next 2 years from there. Okay. All right. Thank you for that review, Ken. So I think, I know there'll be discussion here. So John and Ben, I typically do, Ken, if you're all right with this, is each of us has a chance to kind of give our feedback, comments, questions. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's fine. I think they'll be directed in general. If you feel like there's something that you want to jump in on, go for it. But where it's a joint policy, I'm not sure that directed always at you. So I think we're at a point now where we're all reviewing it for hopefully a final time. John?
Okay, thanks, Tina. Good evening, Ken. I'll ask some questions, but it won't be the end of my questions. I'll start and then I'll yield to my colleagues and probably circle back. But I guess the first question I have is for you to explain to us where your committee sourced the idea to decouple this money and use free cash for the Middlesex retirement model.
Right, there are a number of reasons for this. One of the questions.
Where you got the idea to source it this way through free cash account?
If you're asking where the idea came from,
yes,
it came out of a discussion we just had in our meetings when we were talking about it. If what you're getting to is, why the 1.5 million, right? It's kind of an unfortunate accident that it turned out to be such a round number. But many years ago, before we established the OPEB trust, the 1.5 million came from implementation of healthcare reform that the legislature allowed us to do at that time. And that was a decision that was made by the current select board back then and the town administrator back then, that all the savings realized, given that we had this at that point in time, we had funded none of the liability. The decision was made among the boards and the town administrator that the money that was freed up by this health insurance reform, rather than just dumping it into the budget, because we would dedicate it for establishing the OPEB trust and for paying off or funding our OPEB liability. It just so happened, it turned out to be $1.5 million. I think the actual number was 1,490 something or whatever, but we rounded it up to 1.5 million. But I think that's very important, because the collective decision back then was based on not wanting to have to remove money from the operating budget to fund OPEB. And this proved to be a very convenient method of doing it. We were implementing some savings. We never took money out of any budget to do this. We just took the savings we achieved and applied this to OPEB. So when you talk about the liability, there's this discussion of what year it gets paid off. We all know it's very variable. It'll change every valuation. But fundamentally, that 1.5 million was set aside to pay off this liability. So I think that from certainly my perspective, and I don't think I'm, speaking out of turn with respect to the committee's thoughts, the feeling is that we should keep it there for two reasons. One is it benefits the largest number of town employees, because the OPEB trust pays for the benefits for all town employees when they retire. The pension stabilization fund covers a much lower number of employees, those who are eligible for pension from the town of Holliston and from the Middlesex County retirement system, which is different, right? A lot of school employees, a significant number, receive their pensions from the Massachusetts teachers retirement system. So that was part of our thinking. The other thinking was that good financial practice dictates that you budget for 3 to 5% free cash every year. And obviously we've been hitting that target for the last couple of years. And because of that, we were very confident as a committee that there would be no difficulty in funding at least the next 2 years, $250,000 out of free cash each year.
At the very end of your response, you began to address my question. Okay, so you determined that 250,000 for free cash was a good idea. Where did you source that number from to attach it to the Middlesex liability?
Oh, that was based on the recommendation from the town administrator.
Okay, and your committee accepted that?
Yes.
Do you folks regularly discuss these kind of metrics with other advisors or outside financial groups, Ken? Early on in your remarks, you spoke about our advisors and our folks in terms of the OPEB trust fund. Did you seek their advice on this model?
On this $250,000 amount?
Yes.
No.
Did you have any consultation with them about the changes that your committee is looking to put forward in general? Did you fact check some of this information, i.e. the 1.5 or the continued 1.5 contribution of OPEB?
I'm kind of unclear on what had to be fact checked. Like what are you asking to fact check?
Well, I think the documentation that's been shared with both our committees through our town administrator indicates that continuing on the $1.5 million contribution path greatly exceeds or accelerates the town's contribution towards eliminating that liability. Isn't that true?
Again, I question that. It changes the valuation every time we get a valuation, which is required every 2 years. The payoff date shifts based on the actuarial assumptions that are used.
Right.
So I wouldn't say it greatly accelerates anything. The goal and the objective when it was implemented was put $1.5 million a year towards it until we reach full funding. And if that turns out to be one valuation, it shows 2033, one it shows 2035, one it may show 2029, to a large extent that's irrelevant, at least in the discussions within the finance committee, that's largely irrelevant. The goal is to get to the point where the liability is fully funded.
I strongly disagree with that remark, and I'll tell you why, Ken. I think it's very relevant. I think when you're attaching some expectation of paying off a liability and using the history of this issue as published by the Finance Committee, there's been certain determinations made through the years of when this liability would be completed, correct? You've advanced dates associated with these payments, haven't you?
Well, first of all, Mr. Cronin, I do object to the fact that you're treating me like a witness on a courtroom trial. there have been many dates bandied about over the years as to when this liabilities will be paid off. As I said, I can produce valuation reports from 2014 that show 2033. I can produce FinCom documents that were based on later valuations that showed later years. I can show you the last valuation, which was again at 2033. It moves. What I'm trying to get to is it's never been targeted that we have a specific year that we must pay it off by, partly because the assumptions change, but partly because when you're paying this off, as the assumptions change and the payoff date changes, you generally don't adjust your payment, right? The whole goal here was the $1.5 million a year until it's paid off. Every time they adjust the assumptions, that number is going to jump around. So we may have published 4 different numbers, but that to me is less relevant than just continuing the 1.5 to get it paid off whenever that time is.
Ken, I'm awfully sorry you feel like I'm cross-examining you. I'm just simply trying to find the facts behind your committee's intent over the years on communicating the liability to the citizens of Holliston who are listening tonight. And as we try to understand what the impact of your committee's recommendation, I think it's important to take a look back at what you folks have communicated. And you started tonight by telling us that this date is not really relevant. And I'm just a little confused as to why, if it's not relevant, your committee repeatedly published dates associated with that. And indeed, I understand that things move. I get the dynamics. But if they move, then what is today's relevant projection of when the liability will be cleared? Do you have that date for us?
2033, according to last valuation.
And as Chairwoman Hine just indicated, we take these financial policies 2 years at a time. Are you to say that the Finance Committee is uncomfortable signing off on a reduction in the commitment towards that liability if we still achieve the targeted dates of which you've mentioned in previous Finance Committee reports?
Yes, because as I've said at least a couple of times now, the Finance Committee believes the $1.5 million was set aside to achieve full funding. The fact that the date moves and that we update the town on what the date is, okay, it's relevant in that we owe it to the town to say, hey, according to our current valuation, this is when we should be able to end this funding. Okay? However, it's not married to a particular date. When it was presented to the town in its original form, back when we formed the OPEB trust, it was presented as we will put $1.5 million towards this liability, and this is when it should be funded, when it should reach full funding. That obviously moves around, as I just said. But every year I've gotten up in front of the town and said, we are continuing the $1.5 million funding for OPEB. That's been the promise. That the savings from that healthcare reform would be used to address and pay off our liability.
Last question, and then I'll make my statement regarding sourcing of information. Has the Finance Committee had their interview or their interaction with the Division of Local Services TAB program yet?
Well, I have. I wouldn't say the Finance Committee has. The only request I received from the town administrator was that I meet with DLS, and I did that back in June.
Just requested the chair.
I couldn't hear you.
They just requested the chair.
Oh, so Ken, you haven't had a chance to talk with them yet?
I have.
The chair.
I just said I talked to them back in June or July.
Oh, I see. So you had some contact with these. Did this particular topic of the OPEB trust fund come up?
To be honest with you, I don't remember. I think that they were more interested in organizational questions than they were about specific policies.
Okay. And as you probably know, DLS does track OPEB liabilities.
Yes.
Okay. Just speaking for me as an alumni of your committee, if I were on your committee, I would be speaking to the Division of Local Services before and if I took a vote to change this commitment or alter it in any way. I'd be reaching out to resources like that to get best practices, ideas, guidelines. The guidelines that I think for the most part the town administrator put in his proposal were sourced from our professionals who interact with their peers all day long. And I know you know Sharon pretty well, you know the town treasurer. But I guess my point is there seems to be an interest by the Finance Committee as elected volunteers to dive into these policies and inject your opinion And that's okay. I think we all come to this table every night with opinions. But I think it's important, given the critical nature of these policies and how important they are to how we guide our finances, that we source those guidelines from these other officials, that we fact check them. Are we within, are we outside the guidelines?
Okay,
That's very important. Go ahead, Ken, you have a comment?
yeah, no, I'd like to just clarify a few things here.
Sure.
First of all, as you well know, the history of this document is that it was constructed by the Finance Committee for the Finance Committee's use. It was expanded to cover the town's policies at a later date. So in its original incarnation, it was a clarification and a solidification of the viewpoints of the Finance Committee on how we were reaching our recommendations. So I'm glad that it's become the town's policy document, but I think that that's important to understand. Second, while I do tremendously respect the officials in the town of Holliston, I've worked with Mary and Sharon for many, many years, and I respect them both immensely. The policies, the implication that the Finance Committee is somehow injecting opinion into the policy is misleading, and I'll tell you why. When we constructed the original OPEB policy, I mentioned that was in consultation with the then select board, the then town administrator, but we also consulted with OPEB experts, including actuaries in the field, people who do this for a living. And we talked to them, and I personally consulted with somebody who at the time was living in town, who has since moved away recently, okay, who sat down with me, went through all the details of OPEB, went through funding strategies, went through preferred methods, and all those kinds of things. In addition, the Finance Committee has in its composition, yes, we are all volunteers, but being a volunteer, as anybody who works as an on-call firefighter knows, does not mean that your level of competence is diminished simply because you don't receive pay. There are several financial professionals on the Finance Committee who do have interactions with professionals that are familiar with these things. So I think it's tremendously misleading to imply two things. One is that we don't listen to the town professionals, because we do. They were a part of the original discussion years ago, although Sharon wasn't here at the time, but Mary was, okay? And second of all, as I said, we do consult. You asked if we consulted on this particular policy, this particular go-round, and my answer was no. But there's a competency on the committee, and we have consulted in the past, and we did consult with professionals when the original policy was constructed. So there is professional involvement there.
Ken, who drafted the original policy?
Beth Liberty, who was a member of the Finance Committee.
The original finance policy?
Yes, yes, she worked, she was responsible for the very first version of these policies. She took them to the then town administrator and worked with him to polish them up. But she was the one that constructed the original document on which this is all based.
I appreciate that history lesson because it corrects my understanding, which was that Paul was responsible for those back in the day. But I digress, and I think Beth, I recall Beth's contribution. She's a very capable person, and I appreciate her contribution. My point here, Ken, is that when you're making such a substantial change to an existing policy, I asked you if you sourced your decision to make that recommendation of funding $250,000 out of free cash from some other expert that said, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a really good idea. Why don't we do that? The answer was, that's all I heard. So
yeah, that
which is, I'm sorry, I'm speaking right now. I heard your remarks, just if you could.
Yeah.
You're using your collective wisdom to make a recommendation. I'm fine with that. My point is, if it was me, I would have reached out to DLS, I would have called Ashland, I would have called surrounding communities to say, hey, do you guys in Middlesex County, do you have this problem? How are you doing? How are you dealing with it? What's your approach to this? We're making a $250,000 decision that we want to back up with some empirical data. I think any scientific approach should include that kind of thinking. And you just said you didn't do it, which is fine, that's your choice. But I appreciate all the work you folks do. You certainly put in a lot of hours. I'm not disputing that at all. I just wholeheartedly disagree with your approach to carving out $250,000 worth of free cash to offset an obligation when the professional, in this case, our paid administrator, put forth a plan that would resolve this whole issue by just diminishing the amount going to OPEB, still achieving that irrelevant timeline goal that you don't want to suddenly recognize, that you publish everything, you that you publish against all the time in your message to the community. And it just doesn't make sense to me. It's as though you're trying to craft an argument that just says, take this 250 idea and like it. And I don't. I really feel it's a bit overreach because it's not backed up by any demonstrated best practice. So, I mean, I'll finish my remarks when my colleagues are done, but that's where I'm landing tonight, Ken.
Well, that you're entitled to your opinion as an elected official. But I think that your attempt to portray it as though the finance committee is somehow incompetent if we don't rely on professionals outside of our own professional knowledge is unfair. But I would also add, this is not a major change. What we are saying is this, the town administrator said he would like to apply $250,000 to the new pension stabilization fund. Okay, his recommendation for funding that was to take it from money that is dedicated to another obligation that we're trying to pay down, right? In our mind, the fact that we have the ability to do both and do the 1.5 plus the 250 from free cash is actually a positive with respect to the rating agencies. And this is something we know from experience. So, you know, you're trying to paint it as a major change. It really is not, because we have the ability to do this, to do both, and doing both is absolutely more of a positive than taking from one bucket and putting it into another and keeping the balance the same.
Okay, Ken, thank you. I just want to reassure you, I don't think incompetent was the word used.
Yeah, I
don't-
take exception with that, Ken.
No,
I think you
well,
invented a word there to spin your.
my
argument.
point being
So good
that-
luck with that.
My point being that Ken, no one's here to toss that word around. So John, you asked to say something, and Vin and Dan, rather, I saw your hands up. I'm just going to follow the flow that I established at the beginning, and then we'll come around at the end for other comments.
Right, no, thank you for pointing that out, Tina. I think Ken just took liberty with a word that was slightly unnecessary in the discussion. I have immense respect for our friends on the finance committee and all the hard work they do. I would never use the word as he did to describe their work. I think he's just using it to elevate his argument. But thank you. I'll follow up after you folks are done.
Okay, Ben.
Ken, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that I think needs to happen is dialogue about these kinds of topics, and having dialogue between our boards, I think, is important, and I think it should be in a public way. So I appreciate you coming here to talk to us. You know, my perspective, I do have a few questions. Some of them are more general, and some of them for more getting everybody to talk about a couple things. But I look at these policies I initially looked at these policies as being something that would sort of help us to maintain our bond rating. And that's kind of the way I was looking at it from a very 50,000 foot perspective, to say, look, we have this AAA bond rating. What do we need to do to maintain it? And how do we get there? I mean, they want to see certain things, and I also think that we should, as best practices, try to get to that. But as I sort of thought about it a little more deeply, I think one of the things that I feel is missing in this conversation, as we look at these things, you know, we look at these policies, they're about, you know, OPEB and pension, and there's stabilization funds and trusts, and there's talking about free cash, and there's and capital and things like that. But I think the thing that's sort of missing from this is the operational implications of the decisions that we're making. And I think there needs to be, we need to sort of be looking at this stuff a little more holistically, because as we all talk about, there's a finite amount of pie, and not everybody can have all the pie. So we have to sort of think about these things in bigger terms. And now certainly free cash is certainly a big player in this particular conversation, because it depends on, you know, some of the assumptions that we make. It's how we get to these points. But I think we need to be thinking about how some of these ideas and policies impact operations and how we operate the town. Because I feel like, you know, when we spend the money on these reserves, it's not necessarily at the expense of operations, because as you know, as we talk about things like free cash is expressly not meant for that. But at the same time, are we making assumptions that lead to free cash that goes down this road? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. But I also think there's something that doesn't sit well with me, that I feel like there's something missing in the conversation as we go through these, go through this. And so, you know, I've certainly talked about this ad nauseum, some of these things ad nauseum when I was on the finance committee. I've certainly talked about it with the finance committee recently, and and I've certainly had other conversations about these things, but I think, I want to sort of understand, and I want us to make sure that as we look at these financial policies, that we're addressing how these policies can impact the operational needs of the town and the investment in the town and how we do things in the town. And that includes things like, capital investment. Like, one of the concerns I have about using free cash to fund pension stabilization is I feel like, I think Travis put it well when he said it's another hungry mouth to feed. And we're basically taking more, we're asking another bird that needs to be nourished in this conversation through free cash. And I think we need to evaluate a little bit more about what free cash is, what we're doing with it personally. I'm not speaking for anyone else, just me personally. There's something that just doesn't sit right with me in general. I mean, not to say that we're, there's nothing bad is happening per se, but we have to think about the fact that if we're putting that money towards the free cash towards general stabilization, pension stabilization, and capital, are we fully investing in the town, or are we just investing in our reserves? And reserves are important, as I first stated about the AAA bond rating, maintaining that AAA bond rating. But it also means that I think we don't necessarily, I don't feel comfortable funding reserves at the expense of town infrastructure, at the expense of making sure that we're investing in the community over the long term. As we looked at last week, when we looked at the water stabilization, and water's different, I realize, because it's funded differently. But the fact is that we have to address the fact that there was a gap in when things were being built, and there were, we're paying for that now because we didn't invest in the town. And I don't want to see us to continue that process. And I want to make sure that we don't have policies that perpetuate that particular line of thinking. I realize, I'm sorry that was long-winded. I'll give you a chance to speak in 1 second. So I guess what I want to ask is, Ken, I want your input here. What do you think when I say, like, are there operational implications of these financial policies, and what do we think they are in general?
Well, I think that the free cash topic is, one that a lot of people misunderstand. The financial policies that we have are what have gotten us to where we are today, including, again, best practices to bias for 3 to 5% free cash. The reason for that, everybody always looks at free cash and their first assumption is this is money that's being taken from operations by under budgeting. That's not really the case. In fact, the bulk of free cash in this particular year, for example, there's a big chunk that comes from the money we put in the reserve fund in anticipation of COVID problems, which the government, federal government kind of bailed us out by passing the stimulus packages. So that freed up that money that was put aside in reserves ended up flowing through to free cash. And when I say the reserves, I mean the reserve fund. Okay. There's also local revenue and local receipts, which actually was higher than expected. Again, because when we were working on the assumptions, when I say we, it's the town, meaning the town administrator, us, when we were having the discussions early on and when we were modeling FY22 or FY21, we were taking a COVID approach because it was early on in the whole COVID situation. And nobody knew, including at the federal level, that everybody was going to suddenly buy webcams and put additions on their house and buy cars and all sorts of other things. So local receipts exceeded our targets fairly substantially. But I'd also caution against that being viewed as a normal. And the reason I say that is because, like the chip shortage you hear a lot about, that chip shortage was caused by accelerated demand, not so much a supply constraint, meaning the industry had modeled for a certain run rate of chips over the next several years, and then found that during the pandemic, there was such huge demand because everybody suddenly was home and wanted new computer equipment and wanted new webcams and everything else, that it caused a great demand spike. The same thing happened locally, where we didn't expect to see that, and we did. So the fact that we had a large free cash number this year could in fact hurt us in future years in that it might have accelerated things like home improvement projects that otherwise might have been spread out over several years. Now, to the point about operations, the budget process obviously looks at what our needs are from an operational perspective. But when you're talking about things like you mentioned infrastructure, those types of projects, your board has talked about, the Stantec study for the water, the Stantec study for the sidewalks, the DPW facility. Those are the types of projects that these reserves, and again, there are different types of reserves, but things like the capital expenditure fund, will be used for. But not, and I think that's important to note. Yes, there are reserves like the stabilization fund reserve that are there to help us when we need it. But things like the OPEB trust and the pension stabilization fund are really there to prevent operational difficulties later on when the expenses associated with those funds, if left unfunded, would grow very rapidly. That's the whole reason why, for example, the $1.5 million in getting to full funding will have a very positive operational impact down the road. So I think that I kind of get what you're saying. And obviously we do consider, we meaning the finance committee, town administrator, your board, we do consider operational impacts as well. But I also think it's important to remember that when we talk about reserves, it's not that we're just stashing money away for the sake of stashing money away. These are, especially in the case of the two trust funds or the stabilization fund for pension and the OPEB trust, those are particularly important to preventing operational issues later on.
Does that answer your?
Yes.
Okay.
I have two other points.
Okay, please. Yeah.
So thank you, Ken. No, I appreciate your insight here. So I have two other comments that I'm going to make, because everybody loves listening to me talk. Is the first is that I think, I'm in favor of what we talked about, what you had mentioned about the capital set aside getting up to 3%. I think that it's a good idea that we should be able to explore ideas of debt funding projects within the levy. We'll have to have deeper conversations about whether or not that's the right approach in certain cases, but I do, fund on a high level, believe that works. But what I think I would like to see in general when it comes to capital funding is I'd like to see it a little bit more based on projects and a little bit more based on what we're doing as opposed to just simply a target. You know what I mean? I think what we should be doing personally is, like, as we go through the exercises of the capital subcommittee, is to basically say, here's how much we need for a given year. Now let's work on putting that money aside towards those things and not just simply feeding the hungry mouth of capital expenditure fund. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, there might be a little bit of that because we know, hey, we've got a big expense coming up next year. We need to put a little bit more aside. But I think we need to be starting to look at those things a little more holistically.
Yes, and I agree entirely. And that's exactly, as you know, that's what we're discussing these days in the capital subcommittee, right? Is discussing what the long-term plans are. We now have a town administrator that's been doing a great job putting a lot of that data together. That's going to allow us to have that discussion. Yeah,
and I think we also have to be able to start moving things around and moving the pieces to sort of get to that point ultimately. The second point I want to make is just a general comment about free cash. Is that, I was thinking about this today in my drive. I had a lot of driving to do in the rain today, so I was thinking about free cash. This is what I do. This is how I spend my time when I'm not talking to poor Dan on the phone. Is that so as I was thinking about free cash, I think one of the things that I can't quite figure out in my own mind, and maybe I'm just not smart enough to know this, but what I can't quite understand is that we've decided that free cash is decoupled from operations, which I think is a reasonable idea. It makes good accounting sense. You don't want to use one-time funds to pay for expenses on a day-to-day level. But I think that action, has deeper, longer range operational consequences. One of the things that, I look at, and, town is not a business. I get it. I understand that. When you talk about things like efficiencies and things like that, you can't get there in town just the way you can municipal government, the way you can in a business. It just doesn't work. But I do wonder if some of our free cash policy could lead to, it could be changed in some way to sort of give a little bit more skin in the game for people in making some operational decisions. I don't know. Maybe I want to ask the question, sort of basically to say, do we have a free cash policy that drives people to spend it or lose it? Or should we have a free cash policy that creates a little bit more efficiency to say like, hey, you know what, if you spend a little less money, it goes towards blah, 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 that'll help you in some other way. I don't know, but I think that to me, there's a piece missing there that I think we need to shore up a little bit. And I realize that I think that's what I want to see with free cash, is that it just feels like this nice big, hey, look at all this stuff we got, now let's go figure out what we're going to do with it, instead of, hey, this is how we got here, this is how we're moving in this direction, this is what we're doing, and incenting people to make different kinds of operational decisions towards making government work a little better, making government work a little more streamlined, potentially. And that's not, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, but I think we should maybe we could create some kind of mechanisms within the free cash policy to get there. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll shut up.
But I'm gonna be real task oriented right now. What you're referring to right now, those are not tweaks that we're looking at in these policies here.
No, I'm rambling.
No, that's not my point.
I would word it as, I think, again, you've seen recommendations from staff, recommendations from finance committee. I think what Mr. Sparrow described is something that can be improved in both versions.
So that was my question, we're not.
No, it's not
The floor is
germane to
yours, you can
necessarily what
speak.
they proposed. It's me. I wanted a chance to be able to talk about some of these issues.
So again, my question and point would be, is this something that you would like to see directed back to the town administrative financial team to work on? A revision to the free cash policy before these are approved?
Yeah,
We can
I
come
mean,
back
if we
around
can,
and-
yes,
is
and I'm
that-
happy,
is that
I'm
what
happy to participate in that process. I
Okay.
don't want to just add something else to there.
Okay. All right, thank you. We can circle back around on that in a minute.
Okay.
So I don't so much have questions as comments. I think I've been open and consistent in embracing the $1.25 million recommendation that initially was made by the financial management team when we first pulled out these policies for review. I understand the historical context, but I do review the actuarial reports, and I just cannot find a current day justification for $1.5 million. Again, understand the historical context, and would actually totally agree that that discipline that has been in place since you referenced 2014, Ken, my facts aren't entirely straight on when this all began, but that discipline has been a great practice that's been carried out by, in large part, the finance committee. I would argue, in my mind, or I'll argue with myself, that it's less about the amount and more about the discipline. And that's what I take away from reading the actuarial reports. Again, do not see a current date justification for why it needs to be 1.5 versus 1.25. I would say that I have not heard any risk identified in the town's ability to provide the intended benefits of OPEB. You initially referenced that the OPEB serves the greatest number of town employees, but at no point in time from discussions here, discussions with the finance committee, and any actuarial report anywhere, have I seen that there's any risk to the town's ability to provide those benefits. And that's not at all, there's no risk, and it's not dependent upon the amount that's put aside each year. So that's in my mind. I don't see that the specific greater good of setting aside 1.5 million today has been established. I just don't hear that in the conversation. I do recall the town administrator's comments about our free cash expectation over the next 2 years to be going down. We should be estimating lower, particularly because with Cannabis Stabilization Fund, we're redirecting revenue to away from rather free cash. And so we shouldn't be expecting the free cash of today, certainly, and perhaps not even of last year. So that's in my mind when I think about tying the pension fund contributions to free cash. I'm very interested in, and this is why 1.25 has always sounded right to me, because I'm very interested in the research, the review, and the recommendation of our financial management team to come back to John's point about where is this sort of compared to best practices or the practices of other communities, other professionals. I absolutely accept that our financial management team has done that research and presented the very best recommendation with that in mind. So I'd like to end though by saying, I'm glad you're here, Ken. I agree with Ben that more dialogue is necessary, especially on topics like this. And so again, very pleased that you're here to join us tonight. And I want to frame this conversation in that there is common ground. We agree that 3% for the capital overlay is a good number. We agree that 12 to 18% for the general stabilization fund is a good change to make. We agree that $300,000 in the reserve fund is a good place to be. So there is common ground in these discussions between the two. We're hearing from Ben that it sounds like there's an interest in looking at the free cash policy. So this may be going back to the town administrator, but want to end with the fact that happy to have you here, and I think there's some common ground. Okay, I think John had some final comments, and then we'll go to, no, I'm sorry.
I'm willing to
David,
wait for,
please, yeah.
before I make some final remarks.
Forgive me, Dan, and Dan, you've been patient. So I think, Dan, your hand went up first. Then you can correct me later if I'm wrong. Go ahead, Dan.
Do you have to?
I'll talk first, I guess. So appreciate all the comments that are made. I can't say that I agree with a lot of them, but appreciate the spirited discussion. One thing, just since it's fresh in my mind, Tina, is that I do want to point out that the town administrator did note that the free cash probably would not be 3.7 million going forward. But if you pro forma that, and by pro forma, that's a financial term, I mean, if you take out the 600,000 extra from the reserve fund that we used, to potentially pay for COVID expenses that wasn't necessary, and then you take out the 300,000 from cannabis, if we do end up putting that into a separate account, you're at 2.8 million, right? And it's been up in that kind of area for a number of years, and 250,000 of 2.8 is 9%. I mean, it's we're not talking a large dollar figure here. And what I continue to come back to, and I realize that only really of everyone here, only Ken and I were a part of this, and really only Ken at the very germination of it. But the promise was made to the town that we would fund 1.5 million to OPEB until OPEB was fully funded. And yes, the date can move around due to actuarial studies, but we would not purposely change the date by changing the funding. And believe me, there have been a number of groups, well, one in particular, and they won't be named, but they do get the largest amount of money in the town every year, who have also wanted a piece of OPEB. And so what I would say is that one large risk of changing our fact-based policies and using the sort of the steady, steady as you go, keeping things consistent, is that there will be other people that will come to request, some of the OPEB money. And once you start reducing it for any reason, even if it's just to put it into another retirement type of account, you've opened a floodgate, in my opinion. And as Ken said, OPEB is for the benefit of everybody. We have over the years said OPEB go predominantly, or 60+% of OPEB is effectively for the teachers. And by reducing our funding of OPEB, I think that hurts that discussion point. But I do want to just take, if I could, just get back to Mr. Cronin's point about this, this major change that we made that we did not consult anyone with. And I take, the major change was the thoughtfulness, and it was the thoughtful suggestion by the finance team to reduce the OPEB funding and to put $250,000 into the pension stabilization. I think the finance committee, certainly myself, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it sounds sort of like that's where most of the other members of the finance committee was that we wanted to try to find the $250,000, but just do it in another way so that we can continue to meet that $1.5 million promise to the town. And so that's where free cash came. And, again, 9% of a sort of a run rate free cash number seemed reasonable to us, especially even if you consider the fact that maybe, people bought more cars, this year than they are going to in the future because they pulled forward some car payments, they pulled forward some household projects. Even if you reduce free cash by half, you're still at under 20% for this pension. And if you decide that you need it for other purposes by using free cash, you can skip a year, or in years like this year, when we have sort of one-time extra windfalls, if you will, we could put $500,000 into the pension stabilization fund with the sort of understanding that potentially next year we don't do it because we may not have as much. I mean, the beauty of using free cash is it gives you more optionality to do that. And one thing I can tell you though is that the rating agencies are not going to look favorably on us reducing our OPEB money and just sort of shifting around the money and shells into other things. And using 250 from free cash for the pension liability is not going to negatively impact the budgets. We're 3 to 5% is what best practices say for free cash. We're at 4%. We're not going to try to reduce revenue expectations to meet that number. There's not going to be any impact to operational spending because of this. It's 9% of what we've been generating, and so I think that that's 9%. It's not a big number.
Dan, you referenced that the rating agencies would not look favorably on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for details on that. I simply because I've read it and I've listened to the town administrator present on it, and I've never heard that.
Well, Tina, I guess I would say is that I'm sure no one has said it, but I would say is that one of the things that I do as part of my professional life, the part that pays for my living, is that I read rating agency reports, not municipalities, but I read rating agency reports all the time for all the credits and all the names that I invest in professionally. I also talk to the rating agency analysts, and I understand how they think and what they're looking for in names. And what they're looking for is they're looking for steady, continued, performance and saying what they continue, doing what they say they plan on doing. And we have been talking for at least since 2014, but really before that, about continuing to put $1.5 million into the OPEB trust fund every year. That is what the town has been promised. That is what the rating agencies have been promised. And when we can afford to use free cash to also then create this pension stabilization fund, there is no good argument for reducing the OPEB money. I can't find one in my, from a finance committee member or in my financial professional opinion.
I think John has a response to that, and then Ben, I think you're up next.
I believe there's a little bit of gaslighting going on with Mr. Alfred's remark, and I'm glad you called him on it, Tina. I would agree with everything Dan said. If as a result of this plan, we were expecting to extend the liability. If we were going to go from a plan 2033, 2037, or 2040 to a 2050, and we were going to short our obligation or our commitment. He's absolutely right there. But he's dead wrong here, because what we're doing is we're tackling this with additional liabilities. The rating agencies would love what we're doing. We're still achieving our goals of tackling this liability. Holliston, by the way, is in the top tier of communities in Massachusetts that is funding the liability of OPEB. We're far and away, Dan, rating agencies' favorite customer right now. So to suggest for a second that we would shift $250,000 into another obligation, into an account, which, by the way, for the record, your committee decided not to vote on a year ago. You do realize that, right? There was some conversations around why are we doing this? We came back and we convinced you to create this article that created the fund for this purpose. You remember that?
We like the fund. We wanted it to be structured in a certain way. So we asked for some time to ensure that it was structured in a certain way, doing our financial due diligence. But hold on a second, John, because I take two issues with what you just said. You went after Mr. Sheda very hard for making a remark that was uncalled for. And I would say that by telling me that I'm gaslighting you, that you were doing the exact same thing that you accused him of doing. Secondly, I would ask, when was the last time you talked to a rating agency analyst? When was the last time you talked to a rating agency analyst, John?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Want to know the name of the security firm too? Or do you want our contact number?
Sure.
Dan, this is not a conversation about who does what for a living and how good we are. It's a conversation, are we heading this policy in the right direction? And to suggest to the people of Holliston tonight that this change that we're trying to support undermines our securities and our bond rating is pure gaslighting. You're
It
trying.
it undermines our
negative-
promise.
Excuse me, you're trying
It
to.
undermines our promise.
You're trying to create a negative with that narrative that doesn't.
It is a negative.
It is, if you look at the numbers associated with this actuarial table, at 1.25, we easily achieve, based on today's numbers, paying off the liability by 2037. Is that a true statement at 1.25, Dan?
You're saying easily, in the actual report at 1.25 says 2037, at 1.5 it says 2033, which is what it said in 2014.
I don't want to, I mean, the people at home who are listening just need to understand that, you know, when we hear rhetoric like that, it's not completely factual. And I'm happy to call them on it as needed, Tina, so thank you for the opportunity.
Everything that I've said has been true, John. I mean, I'm sorry that you're calling me a liar, but everything that I've said has been true.
Again, we're
I'm
gonna,
sorry, Dan, you know, go fill out a hurt feelings report somewhere. Nobody's calling you a liar. I called you on the facts of what you said.
You just said that what I said was not truthful.
You can't say that to the citizens of Holliston tonight. I'm sorry, you can't. It's
No,
not.
Okay, John.
I'm gonna turn to Travis. I think he has a comment to jump in on.
Right,
See
so-
what's about the rating agency.
Right, so just a couple of things on the rating agencies. One, I disagree with Mr. Alford, but I understand his point. They do like consistency. I think the reason that the staff came up with this recommendation, to Mr. Cronin's point, is that we are keeping them within the liabilities, which is why I believe we would not be negatively impacted, with the way it was proposed. At the same point, I think, you know, looking at these two proposals, the staff and the FinCom proposals, I believe that we have pretty much, and again, so to making rating agencies happy and understanding that, you know, there may have been a history here with who generated the first policy, but at this point, we have a policy that needs to be signed off on by the select board and the finance committee. We do have some time for that, but at the same point, you know, I'd be happy to get anybody more information on OPEB, but at the moment, it doesn't sound like we're coming to a conclusion here. I believe on everything, and the chair referenced most of them, the reserve fund, the general stabilization, capital expenditure, and the cannabis stabilization fund. I believe we're all in the same place. I think there's some tweaking potentially from comments from the select board that could be made on the free cash. And then at this point, I would also say, you know, staff can do its best to take, you know, proposals from the finance committee and the select board and understanding the policy that, you know, through the budget process, we may have a disagreement with the final, and at the end of the day, it's gonna be town meeting that will decide that, and we'll word that in the best possible way, to make sure that the rating agencies understand that, you know, the outcome is going to still be in the best interest of the town, and then we just have really what is, so, you know, slightly different ways to look at the same problem. With that, I would say, again, I think that if you are to ask staff to bring back, you know, these two versions to you, I think we can get there.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I believe Ben has super patiently been waiting, and I think Ben might have had another comment. So Ben, go ahead.
Thank you, Tina. I just want to add a couple of things. Ben kept saying that, talking about reserves and implying that the OPEB and the pension is a reserve, and it's really not. You're paying down a liability. So, which is different from a reserve, which is kind of like a account you have for future use. So I just want to clarify that. Yes, you're going to be using funds in the future, but these are actually calculated liabilities. So this is based on a certain point in time. They say, okay, this is what we estimate your liabilities to be, and you haven't funded them, blah, blah, blah. Which also gets to the point of, yeah, this is a picture in time. I mean, so you're looking at numbers based on certain things they know and certain things they're not taking into consideration when they do the calculations for the OPEB, they being the actuaries. So they're not calculating if we increase our staffing, which we know we are, how that's going to affect it. They not looking and saying, okay, well, let's say your percentage of your investment goes down. They do a little bit of it, but not really. I mean, we already know. I reached out with Travis's help and we asked several questions, and they pointed out our investment return has already gone down 25 basis points. So it was 7%, but now it's 6.75. And my guess, looking at the trends, it's going to go down more for next year. So these things are going to impact the liability, and things we should be aware of when we're looking at this funding of 1.5 million and said, okay, well, it's apples and we're just taking it from one. Yeah, a number says that, but you can't really rely solely on that. You have to look at everything in a whole. This is only a report for the purposes of the auditors. The auditors need it for the financial statements. And there's disagreements about how much of a discount percentage to use. The actuaries would prefer if you use the bond rate, so 2.5% versus what we have there is 7%. There's a lot of different things in there. So hang your hat on the fact that, okay, well, you don't see certain numbers and the dollars going down and it really doesn't make a material difference. Correct, but you're looking at a report for a purpose and you're trying to lay another purpose on it. It's helpful, it's a guide, but there's so many other factors. We know, we heard the Medicare rate, we don't have money. The Medicare trust is going, it's bankrupt. They'll be bankrupt in a couple years, which is crazy. So that affects all these different things. They're gonna have to fund it somehow, and my guess is they're gonna increase the premiums, which in turn is gonna increase the cost of how much the town needs to fund for the OPEB. So those aren't being calculated, but we know these things. So for us to say, okay, well, let's not worry about it per se, because we didn't really. And I agree, John, we're ahead of everybody else, but that's great because everybody else should be worried about this. This is a big, huge albatross around the whole entire United States. All these municipalities, localities, states, and everybody, they've been putting their heads in the sand all this time for pension and OPEB. They're not worried about it, partly because of the way they were doing accounting, which was, hey, we don't care about the future liabilities, we care about now, cash. Now, GASB, Government Accounting and Standards Board, realized there's a problem out there. Bondholders are worried. So they start making you actually record these things. People are recognizing it. So we can't bury heads in the sand anymore. And I don't think us changing our policy from 1.5, that's one portion of the thing. 2 years ago, we weren't even thinking about pension. And I made a promise to Tina and the rest of the select board at the time. I said, we're going to focus on it. We're going to get our hands around it. I promise you.
Yeah, before him, there wasn't.
But that wasn't at the behest of taking money away from OPEB. That was, we need to worry about OPEB and the pension. Pension wasn't even on our radar. Now it is. So now we need to focus on it too. These are two liabilities. Yeah, great. It sucks. We have to worry about all these things. Yeah, I wish we didn't have to. I wish we could put sidewalks in a lot of different places. We need to worry about our water, but these are liabilities that people buried their heads in the sand all along. Now it's coming home to roost, and we're ahead of the game. Yes, no question about it, but that doesn't mean we should take our foot off the pedal.
You know, I think John has a comment, I think Ben has a comment. Are you comfortable with Travis taking this back to the financial?
Yeah, I think we need to,
Okay.
and I would like if he talks to the investment bankers and with Dan's assumption, you know, it could impact our rating. I don't know. I don't deal with raters, S&P on a regular at all. So it's something I think we need to ask our investment banker.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we speak with, we use a banker who sits with us when we do our calls with S&P, as we did this last time before we were upgraded. We discussed with them, as I mentioned, that we would be coming back as we do every 2 years with updated financial policies. They referenced that in the report when we got our AAA bond rating agency. And, you know, again, as I have done these in multiple different communities, including for a state organization, as we approach OPEB and pension, the argument here is not that OPEB is not the issue that it describes. It's simply that between the two liabilities it was my recommendation previously, and you know, sort of the way that I view these two liabilities, that the pension is the better way to approach it, because of all of the variables that exist on the OPEB side. Now, obviously, Mr. Murphy painted a very bleak picture, and as somebody who talks about this, I often do too, to people who don't understand it, but there is another side to it, which, as Vin explained, right, there's problems with Medicare. There's also discussions on the other side to say, and there have been quite a few things that I think we can all say, I don't understand how the federal government is paying for these things. I think Vin highlighted a couple of them. One of them would be the discussion to change Medicare from 65 to 60, which drastically changes the picture of OPEB for any town in America. And so all of these things that on the pension side change every decade or so when the state makes small tweaks, so that the pension is very definable in terms of the liability, whereas on the OPEB side, there are things that are going to be changing completely outside of the control of anybody in the state of Massachusetts. And that's why the sort of recommendation to begin to shift, to make sure that the pension is receiving, you know, and again, they each have actuarial studies assigned to each one of them, one of which is legally funded, legally obligated for us to fund, and the other one is by best practice. And that was sort of the genesis of it. I don't believe that S&P would negatively impact us at all, but I'd be happy to confirm that.
If I could just clarify one thing, Madam Chair. I didn't say that we would be downgraded if we did this. I said that it would be a credit negative, certainly compared to sort of putting 250 aside from free cash additional. So just to be said, I was not meaning to imply that we would be downgraded, just that it would be a credit negative. So.
Okay. Thanks for the
Could I
clarification.
just point out though, I mean, one thing with the pension, we're almost 50% funded, the liability versus we're only 34%. I'm going off of S&P. I don't have the actual numbers from this past year. So we're in a better position with the pension. And that's why, and I told Ben, I said, you know, let's discuss this in a couple of years, but in the meantime, let's continue doing the 1.5.
I
Okay,
don't necessarily agree with that point, right? You're looking at the funded ratio again. The way that the liability is calculated on OPEB is vastly different from pension, and the way that we're benchmarked from an S&P standpoint, in terms of these negatives, we are benchmarked much more heavily on our funded ratio on a pension system because all of these pension systems are under PARAC on the state level, and all of that information is benchmarked in terms of the, you know, what they're using for their discount rate, what year they're using for their funding ratio, and all these different things that at 50%, we are on the lower end of state funded systems. On the OPEB side, we are in the, as we mentioned before, I won't give the exact percent, but it's top 10% in terms of what people are doing in OPEB. So comparatively, we're much more aggressive on OPEB than pension. We're doing much better on one than the other.
gentlemen, I appreciate you being here. I think
Thank
I know, John has a comment too. We have staff who are on the agenda who actually need to leave, so I'm gonna move things along. Thank you for your comments. Ken, are you comfortable taking these sort of common ground pieces back to your finance committee meeting and sharing them?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. All right, John, you had a comment?
Yeah,
So if you
just-
don't mind, excuse me. one
Just
more.
quickly, Dan, just to correct you, you used the words rating agencies would not look favorably upon this change. Those are your words.
That's not a downgrade, John. That's it's a negative. You're not correcting me. I said it's not a downgrade.
Thanks, Dan. I wanted to go back to what Ben Murphy was saying because I really enjoyed listening to him. That's the kind of dialogue I want to hear. I think he's on to something, and I think trending is these policies are 2 years. That's basically what we sign on for. We look at these policies every 2 years because things change. The markets change, our investment strategies change, our financial positions change. That's a good thing. And the way that I think Vin put it out there meant that there's more room for us to have a dialogue with other experts and people who can help us value check our own positions. Furthermore, Mr. Shader said at the beginning that, you know, this is not that big of a deal. And forgive me if I misquoted you, Ken. It was around the idea that this is $250,000. It's that. And I disagree. I think $250,000 is lost opportunity cost. It's money within our budget that we should have the flexibility to use year to year. A couple of years ago, the Finance Committee made a very public statement that the reason it needed to cut stipends associated with the Board of Assessors was because they needed the $8,000 to balance the budget. And it was that tight. And if we're removing $250,000 from any discussion on the front end, whether we budget our budgets more tight and right, or on the back end, using the free cash the way the town needs to, I don't believe tying our hands in this manner that the Finance Committee is recommending is smart. It seems antithetical, and it's oppositional to our overall strategy of giving good services to our citizens. So I reject it, and I really didn't find anything substantial defending that position tonight, but I wanted to salute Ben Murphy for at least giving us some thought that there's a place we can go to take this idea and fact check it. And I also have to embrace what Ben, my colleague, was saying. What is free cash? What is it? How should communities use it? We have guidelines from DLS. We all read them, at least I did. Those are nice, but I'd like to have a conversation with TAB and DLS and find out what the best practices are behind that and share that wisdom with you all. So that's my final comment. I do think there's a path ahead, and I think a lot of it involves more dialogue. So thanks to Vin, thanks to Ben. Appreciate your comments, and be a headway with me. Thank you.
Ben, you have a last comment?
Yeah, two quick things. I think one of the things I heard from the Finance Committee is that OPEB is a benefit for all employees, and the pension only impacts some employees. That may be factually correct, but I don't like that line of thinking for a couple of reasons. Number one, I mean, first of all, it's a liability for the town in both cases, and I think they're both obligations for the town, regardless of who it impacts. But I think the second thing is it just sort of implies that certain group, like if it only impacts some groups, then it's not good enough for the entirety. And I don't like that line of thinking personally, and I just wanted to sort of mention that. And the other thing was also to that, something along that line is that one of the things the finance committee said, people were talking about living up to promises, and there's a lot of promises made by a lot of groups. And this board makes a lot of promises too, and we have obligations that we have to commit to. And I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of promises to be made, and to say that some promises can be kept and some can't, that is true. But I want to be careful to make sure that we understand that sometimes when we make these promises, quote unquote, that other promises might not be kept. So I just want to be careful about using words like that as a reason for doing things as we've always done them. I think it needs to be factually based, and I appreciate Vin's comments as well. You made some fair points about the reserves, Vin, so thank you for calling me on that. I appreciate it. That's all I'm going to say. So thank you very much for that.
All right, again, Ken, I appreciate you being here. I don't see a motion tonight to approve, to accept. I do see direction to the town administrator to, further solidify the common ground, because we're going to want that. We want a nice solid foundation of common ground here. And also, I believe you said you would look for some rating agency feedback and take the finance committee edits back to the financial management team for review.
If everybody's amenable, we'll take another crack at it between these two.
And
Okay.
DLS.
And DLS tab. Ken, is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Okay. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to move on the agenda again. I'm going to take Chris Mayo if I can.
He's going to be here for number 2, so we can actually stick with number 2.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, I'm going to pull up. We're going to move on then to number 2 on the agenda, which is discussion of ownership options for the streetlights in Holliston. Maybe the finance committee will stay and hear this good news. I hope you guys will.
Ken had I didn't see if he wanted to stay, but I know he had.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
that's
think I can stay for a few more minutes, but I only have probably about 5 or 6 minutes left.
okay. Chris Mayo, our IT director, I'm going to ask you to come to the table if you would for the discussion on the streetlights.
Yep.
And then we're going to move you right away. So into number 3,
Right, once we
the
get through this, we'll,
Green Community Report.
all right, so just to give a little bit of background here, and I had a sort of understanding going through FinCom meetings, select board meetings in the past, that there was always an interest in town to convert streetlights in town to LED for a variety of reasons, but there was a hurdle in place, which was that the town did not own the fixtures. So through a process that Eversource initiated recently, which was a grant program that DPU pushes them to do for LED conversions, they reached out to us. The program was for towns who own the light fixtures but had not converted to LEDs. They sent it to us, which led to an ongoing conversation for the past probably 3 weeks. Namely, that we have been being billed at a rate / tariff, I guess is what they call it rather than rate, as if we own the lights, meaning that we were maintaining them. So the difference in that rate, which we were paying about $3,700 a month on average, or $44,000 per year, and then if we had not owned them, we would have been paying approximately $10,700 per month, or $128,000 per year. So a sizable difference. So it was initially sort of presented to us as this change is about to be in place. We've realized that we've been billing you incorrectly, and we pumped the brakes. We are not, as I think Mr. Sparrow mentioned before, the way that we operate does not work well with making changes mid-fiscal year as drastically as that. And they were very understanding. We had a call with them, and they explained a few options to us. So at this point where we are, we want to do nothing. The new billing rate, they've agreed to hold us to the old rate tariff through the end of this calendar year. And then as of January 1st, 2022, they would start billing us at the correct rate. Conversely, what we could do, we've been offered a purchase and sale to take ownership of the lights. This is, the actual light fixtures, the arms, the mechanism, but not the poles. We would take ownership of all of those. We have an itemized list from them, although we want to confirm that itemized list. And then we would then be responsible. We would then have the ability to pursue options for LED conversion, which we had not previously under the old thinking. We would then also have to come up with some sort of service level agreement for maintenance of the lights. So currently what happens is theoretically, we put in a request into the Eversource system, and they go out and fix the light. We have a list of quite a few lights from the HPD that shows that process is certainly not flawed, but the list is long. So, we're looking at potentially a service level improvement. There are options out there. We looked at Wellesley Municipal Light does this for a few communities, and then there's the private sector options as well, at approximately $2,000 per month. The other thing that we'd have to consider from our end is potentially adding these most likely to our insurance policy with Maya, although from my understanding, it's not going to be a sizable cost. And then again, as I mentioned, it would allow us to pursue LED conversion, which would bring down our overall usage, which is environmentally friendly, and then also eat into these costs. So where we are at the moment is that I have town council reviewing the purchase and sale document and the process, and we'll be hearing back on that. We've had the sustainability coordinator, the IT director, and facilities manager speaking with Eversource and myself. Matt Zedek, the sustainability coordinator, is currently researching options beyond simply Wellesley Municipal Light. Chris Mayo has been working as the primary focus on the green communities, which we'll speak about next, for options for the HID to LED conversion, and then potentially their ability to do an audit for us of the itemized list of lights. From a sheer cost perspective, I don't know that we honestly have many options. It seems as though the best cost option is going to be to execute the purchase and sale. And in that regard, it would be making sure that we get the best deal possible, making sure that we think of things like, in taking ownership that Eversource may continue to maintain the lights until the end of the fiscal year, allowing us to pursue a contract with maintenance moving forward beyond that. A couple other interesting points just before I open up the discussion. We did ask, as I mentioned before, we asked how long we could stay at the previous rate tariff. They've agreed to January 1st, 2022, although, again, we can certainly look to push back on some of these things if it's going to take a while. Eversource cannot continue the current LED grant opportunity, which led to this whole conversation, although they do see a renewal of that grant opportunity in calendar year 22. And lastly, on the documentation that they provided to us, there's about 85 to 90% of the towns in Eastern Massachusetts that own the streetlights under these types of agreements. And of the ones who own their streetlights and had previously not converted to LED, 5 towns took them up on their recent grant opportunity. That was the other information that we received. So I understand that's a lot of information, and I don't have a final sort of output here. There's quite a lot of questions that I'm sure some of the technical questions the IT director can get in on, but Jay Tallerman and Lisa Mead, who does these types of things within MTC, is reviewing the P&S, and we're looking for maintenance options, and we're looking for, if we're going to pursue the purchase and sale, how quickly we can move with an LED conversion.
So if, depending on how the board feels, we would look to vote on a motion to authorize you to engage with Eversource on the purchase and sales agreement tonight.
You could do that, or I can bring you back more information.
Okay.
Provided you're comfortable with council engaging.
Okay. Any questions?
I do a couple. Ken, I'm glad you're still on the call. I'd like to throw some compliment your way, because as long as I've known you, this has been probably at the top list of your questions every year. When are we going to convert to LED on streetlights? And it's a sensible question, because I think for years we've always imagined from a scalable savings, that conversion would be measured in 5 to possibly 6 figures of operating costs per year. And so, forgive me for putting you on the spot, but I happen to think in the back of my head, at one point your committee or you gave an estimation of how much we could save by going to LEDs townwide for the 900 some odd poles that we have. To me, that's the end goal here. If we've stumbled upon a problem, sounds like we'll get through it. But I think when we own the poles and achieve the desired outcome, we'll finally get what Ken always thought was, and I agree with him, I've always thought this was a big savings. Ken, any thoughts on how much we could expect to save by going to LED?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't looked at it in many years, because just in case, I don't know how much everybody knows of the history, but we did look at this years ago. Now it's a different situation, right? Because the billing, the kind of, oops, we found out there's a billing problem. No, we're going to fix it. But when we looked at it the last time, Yeah, I mean, just from a straight electricity usage point of view, I mean, there are other factors in there, but you can, these high intensity discharge lights could be replaced with lights that are probably 90% more efficient than what we have right now. So you could, in theory, look at just as a broad brush, say it would save 90% of the electricity cost. So.
Great.
So how fast will you do this?
Any other questions, Don?
Well, the key, there's just the thing, if I could add one more thing, the key is that, to Travis's point is, right, we want to make sure that we have some provision for the maintenance of the lights, because, my complaint about the LEDs was about the lights was not only were they inefficient, but there was this perverse incentive, which is because we didn't own the lights, there's no incentive from Eversource's standpoint to put in more efficient lights because they make more money by having inefficient lights. So the good news in all this is that you can get to efficient lighting and and realize this cost savings to the town and also help the environment. It's just a matter of understanding that, hey, once we sign on the dotted line, then when a light goes out, we have to fix it, that kind of thing. And hopefully with LED lights, we don't have to do that very often.
Right.
And by the way, I do have to sign off now, so I just wanted to say thank you for letting me come in for the discussion, and we'll be in touch.
Have a good evening, Ken.
Right, my colleagues will be here to answer any questions you have for the finance committee. So
Perfect, thank you. Bill said, John?
Yes, thank you. Good.
Ben?
Partially been answered. Two questions. So this would also mean that any new lights that came online, like we talked about, developments, the warrant article, that they're putting street lights on there, any new lights that come online will become a town's immediate. Is that accurate? Or?
They would not own, Eversource would not own any lights moving forward.
Okay, so everything would come into the town's possession. Okay. And then the last question is that with respect to LED lights and things like that, would it make sense would we have to keep like an inventory of lights somewhere, like we'd have to keep like, some 10 lights or something like that, or would we be able to just basically use like the maintenance contract they would have the inventory themselves?
I would suspect with your maintenance agreement, you would have to keep the LED. And what a lot of towns do is they'll get a list of like 10 lights that are out, then they'll go out and do one day, just replace the 10 lights that are out. They'll keep kind of a list running for a month or so. They won't go out every time a single light goes out.
So they would do like probably like once a month or something like that, or unless it was like something that's particularly egregious, like a whole year or something like that. Something along that line.
That sounds reasonable. And right, so part of it is, Eversource has provided us with their itemized lists. It's just some of the feedback we've got from other communities who dealt with this is that, you want to have your own list as well for cross-referencing.
Right.
And yes, there's a variety of reasons that we would use that list, including putting it with Maya, who itemizes a number of things that they cover for us. The reason, quite honestly, that the insurance coverage of it is not going to be the sizable cost, whereas the maintenance contract, making sure that we get the service level that we need, it is probably the bigger concern, is that without owning the poles themselves, if you think of the real sort of catastrophic issues that could happen that would lead to insurance claims, the actual light fixtures are not that. There's certainly things that if we own the poles as well, we would do differently than have been done, but that is not a problem that's Holliston specific. And it's also not Eversource specific, it is also Verizon as well.
And so that basically, as I'm understanding it, if it's if the maintenance contract is $2,000 a month, we wouldn't because we wouldn't have to keep necessarily inventory, that would be kind of an all-in cost, like they would take care of the parts and things like that as well.
We're still doing our research on that, but
Okay.
Can I make this one? We don't own the poles under this agreement.
We do
It's just the what is it actually? Is it the whole structure, or is it just
it's a metal arm that attaches to the pole. And then
overhead and all that?
Correct, the lamp.
And it would be our obligation, like if something happened to a pole, we'd have to put it back up if we were.
So
Not the pole, we don't have to put
No,
the
not the
pole back
pole,
up.
not the pole. That actually happened to me when I was on Island Street. There was a light right in front of my house, and then the pole got knocked over when the light came down.
So in the past, and Chief can correct me if I'm wrong, we've had the situation where all the poles fell down Elm Street, I think. Eversource and Verizon were nice enough to move all of our cabling over. Hopefully during an emergency, they would do that, but otherwise, contract would have to include, putting the fixture back on.
And this also, sorry, one more question. It would also include poles that are not necessarily attached to telephone pole, like lights not attached to pole telephone poles. They would be like lights that are like at my neighborhood, where I'm at, that's lights. for more than that.
If it's an Eversource light, then we would be purchasing it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Just a couple of things. So I was on the call with Eversource today, and it sounded like there's a high level of confidence that a purchase and sales agreement could be worked out in time for January 1st.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And there was
Surprised by
also,
that, but they're just confident in the lawyers, I guess, but
okay.
sure we can.
They move fast when they need to.
There was also, I believe, confidence that the maintenance contractor could help with the audit, because that was another big piece of this, is getting an audit done to know the inventory that we would be signing off on for purchase and sales by January 1st. So you're feeling confident that we'll have that audit done?
That part, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
So the one that
So that makes-
Chris has spoken to is the people who have generally done work for us on green communities.
Okay,
And so they do that work,
Okay.
but timing of January
Time we don't
1st,
know.
that has
Okay.
not been.
okay, got it. And then we have a backlog of lights that need to be addressed.
We do.
So
There were 70 of them on that list, I counted.
I think that would be one request I imagine John and Ben would make with me, is that we go back to Eversource and say, these have been there for a little bit, I would assume. They're not all arriving today on the list.
Assure you that the staff in my office is very aggressive in trying to get those
Perfect.
accomplished.
Okay. And then last, you mentioned the Green Communities grant program. We would potentially in the future, not now, but potentially in the future, seek grant funding through the Green Communities grant for LED conversion. Is that one of the options?
That is absolutely an option. Probably a phased approach, because when we move forward, we're only eligible for about $100,000 a year.
Okay,
So my guess is you're looking at probably 2-year approach if you do it all the green communities. I think if you sign a purchase and sale on January 1st, we'd be looking at the April green community slot to put it in an application.
all right. I think we have consensus and in favor of moving forward with this. So I'll entertain a motion to authorize town council to engage with Eversource regarding purchases, possible purchase and sale agreement for approximately 950 lights.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Okay. Chris, I was trying to follow along on that email thread and done a great job. And you, Matt, and James, in tracking all of this down. This is very complex set of conversations you're having. All right, so we're gonna move on in the agenda. We're gonna move number 5 up now. Give Chris, who is at the table, a chance to present the Green Community report.
Thank you for having me for this. This is 5th annual report that we have to do. Back in December of 2015, the town was designated as a green community. Basically, was on pledge to decrease electrical consumption and heating consumption by 20%. Unfortunately, we are very far off that this year. In fact, we have increased from our baseline year by about 0.5%, and that is mainly due to heating during the COVID year. The schools, all 3 schools and the police station, basically has increased by about 40% their gas usage due to the policies of keeping the windows open for air movement even during the winter time. We were trending, it was basically saving about 2% for the first 4 years. So, we didn't have COVID, we probably would have been about 8 to 9% savings this year. But because of COVID, we basically covered even on a baseline year. A couple positive notes in the report this year. For the last 2 years, our gas usage at the public library increased by 50% in the previous 2 years. This year, the facility manager brought in a heating contractor that found some faulty equipment and thermostats in there. Those have been replaced, and now we actually saved about 10% over a baseline year at the library. Another positive is that as part of the green communities, we did a motion sensor light switch project at the elementary school. And we saved about 9% electricity over there because of that project. And the last thing is the water treatment at the wells has increased by about 35% from our baseline here due to more homes in the town and more water usage. So, more pumps. So that is an increase to our baseline as well. So otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve the report so we can send it for November 1st.
Any comments, questions, Tom?
No comments. Questions?
Ben?
My only comment is Chris, thank you for doing all this. I think this is great stuff, and I really think this is an important initiative that we should be continuing. It's great to see. So I appreciate the work that you put into it. So thank you very much.
I only have a comment for Travis. I remember the conversation when the facilities manager was looking to purchase his car, his vehicle. And I remember the conversation revolving around sort of energy use, sort of fuel and electric being an option. So I followed all of that. So I know why when I look at combined MPG rating for our new vehicles, it's as low as it is. In the future, I know that we'll continue as a town to seek any opportunity we can to convert our municipal fleet to electric or hybrid, because it's quite impressively low. They're big vehicles, I totally get it. There aren't other options, and if there are, they're extremely expensive, but hopefully in the future we can get that combined MPG rating down, because I think the average for new vehicles is under 20 miles per gallon. Future goal for us, if we can, based on technology and cost. So Chris, I have no other comments. So I will entertain a motion to authorize submission of the Green Community and report as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries.
Thank you.
Only an hour and a half to get started at this point. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, we're gonna move on then to the CARES Act ARPA programmatic and programmatic update, excuse me, and as Chief Cassidy comes. Good evening,
Good evening.
how are you?
Exceptional, thank you.
Okay, you have a few things to present tonight.
Yes, I have 3 requests for CARES funding, which, as a reminder, we plan to spend down the remaining balance of CARES by the 29th of this month. But the 3 requests that I have for you are $170 for technology. It's for a docking station, so that is accelerated telework capacity. Request for $3,100, which was voted on by the Council on Aging for touchless fixtures. These are both faucets as well as some light fixtures that would be touchless to minimize the common areas that would be touched by the guests at the 150 Moving Street location. And the last is a $5,000 request from facilities, which would be for the purchase and installation of a water bottle filling station at 1750 Washington Street. There is not currently a water filling station or a bottler there. So this would be similar to the one that was installed here at Town Hall as well as at the police station. And so this would be the physical distancing category of eligible expenses.
I understand that the 3,100 for the touchless faucets is infection control, but it is also aging in place friendly. So it is one of those things that those with limited range of motion or arthritic changes or visual deficits benefits tremendously from. So what a great fit
Sure,
to
absolutely.
have that at the senior center. John, any questions?
I do, Chief, just checking in to see if we have any answers from our friends at A&F about extending certain procurements beyond the end of October.
All the guidance that I've seen coming out from DLS has indicated that we need to spend by October 29. And if we haven't spent it by October 29, very shortly thereafter, they'll be coming to grab what's left over.
Right, but we had discussed the fact that their own guidelines indicated a certain provision. And I thought you were going to ask if.
I did, yeah. And the guidance that came back was, it's on our deadline.
Okay, there's a certain disconnect there. I think it's just have to leave it. It's just government not answering their own phone calls. I just leave it all on.
Correct.
No, other than that, I support the request.
Nothing, just good to see Good to see the chief. Mondays with the chief is still going.
Trying to think of when you did your story on this. So we're looking at 8,270 total.
Correct.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve $8,270 of CARES Act funding for the purchase of a docking station, touchless faucets for the senior center, and a water bottle filling station at 17th. Washington.
So,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries. Thank you, Chief.
And then just from an informational standpoint, our numbers continue to trend in the proper direction. We had one additional case tail end of last week, so we have 13 active cases right now. And for those that are not aware, the town of Ashland, in cooperation with the Department of Public Health and Transformative Healthcare, has opened up a drive-through COVID testing at the MBTA Community Rail Station on Route 135 in Ashland. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7 to 11 a.m., Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, 2 to 7 p.m. Pre-registration is required. So if someone in our area needs to get a test, there continue to be options available in addition to the mass pharmacy locations. There are also public locations. Ashland is pretty good.
Chief, I'm going for a booster shot tomorrow. So other question was, in terms of Board of Health, they met on Thursday night. They have extended the mask mandate for municipal buildings until November 1st.
They met on, I believe it was Tuesday night, but yes, no, it's
Okay.
fine. They extended their mask order that had previously gone into effect the day after Labor Day through November 1st. This was to be consistent with the policy that DESI had put in place for schools. And so there was not going to be a which type of municipal building am I going to make it to. And they're continuing to monitor the metrics as well as vaccination rates and a whole host of other considerations. And we're very eager and looking forward to ACIP making a recommendation for the 5 to 11-year-olds being able to receive a half dose. That needs to go through committee, and of course that's just one manufacturer that has submitted for approval, but the others will probably follow pretty quickly.
And that was an October timeline for that decision potentially.
Yes, we hope.
And then in terms of ARPA, excuse me if I missed it when you were getting to it, but any update on ARPA? You have a steering committee meeting
On the 20th.
time. Okay.
Yes.
Post the agenda today, so that's on the calendar.
Yeah.
12 p.m. on October 20th.
Right, and one of the things that hopefully we'll be able to discuss there and then bring back to you is obviously with the phasing out of the availability of CARES funds for certain ongoing expenses, which originally the board and FinCom had looked at in terms of do we embed these in our operating budgets or do we rely on federal funds. CARES funding will sunshine, so obviously ARPA steering would need to make a recommendation to your board for ongoing expenses like cleaning and sanitizing of public buildings, public health surveillance, PPE, just to make sure that there's no gap.
Okay.
So just, there's no recommendation yet, and
Yeah.
our flow chart says it needs to come through ARPA steering, but we do have that on the agenda on the 20th so that you can make a decision probably on the 25th prior to funds sunshining on the 29th.
Okay, so a list of ongoing COVID response type spending will be prepared for that October 20th.
Which had been placeholders from when the form was originally due back on August 2nd. I put a bunch of placeholders in there and then I've added some subsequently. We just want to make sure that there's no gap and that as long as it's possible to not have these negatively impacting department budgets.
Okay. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. All right, we're gonna move on to warrants.
seeking a motion to approve the warrant for $1,356,831.64.
Motion, we have a second.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Anything else, John?
Let's get for the warrants.
Okay, we have public comment up next, and I'm gonna kick it off, start it if you gentlemen don't mind. We have tonight, before us on the table here, those of you watching, you can see both a certificate and a flag The flag that you see here was flown by the troops in Qatar for the Holliston American Legion during the month of May of this year, May 2021. So again, this flag here was flown in Qatar at a camp by the troops for the Holliston American Legion. It's been returned obviously to Holliston, and the American Legion Representative Walter McGrath presents it tonight to Town Hall for permanent display. So thank you, Walter McGrath. It's with great pride and honor that we will display this flag here in the select board meeting. John.
Just a couple of things. First, an apology to my friends at HCAT. I could not make the vaunted trivia last week.
So
Yeah, I put my partner Ben in a bad spot, and I'm gonna let you take all the credit on what happened next. So apologies to our friends at HCAT. I get swept up at work at the last minute, and but things worked out. Do you want to tell the rest of the story right now? There are viewers at home that want to know.
I was gonna say, we have
We're
to
gonna be
wait for the
bragging
episode
and
to
forgetting
air.
about
I'm not supposed to reveal everything before the episode airs. No, we
Oh,
We had,
oh, it hasn't
I had
aired
a,
yet.
yeah, it hasn't aired yet. I had a pinch hitter come in. We found somebody to join me, and we had a really fun time with Vin and Vin Murphy right there, and Mark Whitaker from the Finance Committee. They were great opponents, and we really had a good time participating. And I want to thank everybody at HCAT and Vin and Mark for a fun game, and Dylan, who stepped up and filled the colossal void that was John not being there. But it was a fun time. So hopefully next time, John, you can
Yeah,
you can do it.
we don't know. There may be some.
Hey, maybe there'll be something. Maybe there'll be
Cheering.
another tournament or
Yeah.
some other time you can participate.
Thanks for holding it. My apologies once again. So a couple more things, Tina,
Oh,
real
okay,
quickly.
hang on, Ben.
What?
Well, so
Why?
no,
Why?
I feel like we have to, he's very brave. I'm surprised by his, I don't know, I won't use the word I want to use, but go ahead, Ben, what do you have to say?
Well, I just want to say, we had a great time. I mean, some people might have been scared to show up, but Ben, he stuck in there, and even though he might have gotten a ringer, but it was a lot of fun. So I would suggest.
And you still lost.
No, we had fun. So I would suggest, doing it again. Maybe other members of the FinCom will take, unless John's too scared, but I think it was a lot of fun. So I'd recommend
I
that.
got a trivia question for you. What's Pro Forma?
It's pretty much just a forecasting based on information. I have to do lots of pro forma for my job. Like, if we change this assumption, what's it going to look like? So, or until the actual numbers come out, they're all pro forma, as opposed to a
I'm
budget.
ready for a rematch.
We think Dylan was a ringer, huh?
I'm just saying, So.
All deserved.
Thanks, Ben.
Just two more items, Tina. I want to read a statement from Sean Reese regarding some Winter Street work. This board's been kept up to date throughout the summer and early fall here on the progress of that major improvement up in Winter Street. Here's the latest update. The Winter Street water main replacement project is complete. Construction began in late April, was completed on September 22nd ahead of schedule and below the contract amount. The scope of the project was to replace the existing water main from Ashland Street to Washington Street, install new gate valves and hydrants, make new connections to existing side streets, replace all water services along Winter Street. In addition, the connection to Washington Street included 2 new gate valves to improve distribution system on operations for use during water emergencies in Washington Street. The roadway trench work will remain in place over the winter season, allowing for a settlement with new pavement on the entire surface of Winter Street from Washington to Ashland taking place in the spring of 2022. So I thank our friends at the Department of Public Works for completing that substantial project on a rather old part of Holliston. Challenging road, work is done. So wanted to pass that along. And through you, Tina, to Travis, I'd like to lay out there, Travis, I think the board could use another update on the solar project. Earlier in the summer, my brain's kind of giving me a shift, but maybe June, we heard that Mass DEP wanted to do some kind of a NISO review, and we heard something in mid-August from Amy, her name was Amy McQuaid or something like that, but nothing since then. And that development, I remember hearing it at the time, was a major setback in terms of our timeframe or expected timeframe for completing that project. It was extraordinarily frustrating hearing it. Some time's gone by, so if you'd be so kind, Tina, through you, I just want to see if perhaps you can give us an update upcoming meeting on this. Thanks, that's all I have.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, I just have one thing, and actually, the right here is, so the agricultural committee met on last Tuesday, and they voted to effectively immediately discontinue management of the community gardens at Pinecrest. And both Adam Taylor and Deb Moore have expressed interest in managing the gardens in some capacity. So I just wanted to sort of let people know about something like that, and say thank you very much to Deb and Adam for stepping up to take care of those gardens at the Pinecrest.
Okay. So we see that as a future agenda item to have sort of a, but we've got Deb on the call and I
If there's
believe we
anything
have.
under public comment, I think if we want to make it a
Yeah.
future decision, I can certainly put an agenda item on, but it seems like they've been hanging in with us. But that was a decision that was brought to Ben's attention as liaison. And that was kind of the feedback that we received where they are with it. But AgCom has taken a motion that they're done with it.
Okay, happy to hear what Deb and or Adam have to say if they have public comment tonight, and then if we have to deliberate or discuss, we can just put it on as an agenda item. Anyone with public comment related to the Pinecrest Community Gardens?
I just wanted to say that Adam and I have, expressed a very serious interest in making sure that the gardens continue. So we would appreciate, the select board taking that into consideration. There are a number of people that have continued to garden up there for a number of years now and really enjoy it. And we think there's a lot of potential that we could even expand on the community effort up there. So we would like the opportunity, to discuss that further at some time.
Great, we'll make sure. Deb, could you just say your name and address for the record?
Sure, Deborah Moore, 183 Mill Street.
Thank you
Holliston.
very much. Okay, and we'll make sure we get that on an agenda. Are you comfortable, Deb, if it comes after town meeting, or Travis, does that sound like a better timeline after town meeting? I'm just thinking our agenda is maybe a little bit jam-packed for, I'm gonna let him decide, but.
My only thought is the time sensitivity with the season changing.
Okay.
At this point, the vote of AgCom was essentially effective immediately.
Okay.
And I don't want any,
Okay.
I don't want anything to happen if this is time sensitive, Deb, is that your sense, or is this for the spring?
I'm sorry, it's hard for me to understand what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's why I think Christian put the microphone back in front of my face. Just trying to gauge the time sensitivity here, as the chair mentioned, based on the schedules that we have upcoming.
Sooner better than later?
I think because the season is winding down, we have an opportunity here. We can wait till after town meeting if that's what you're looking for. Certainly, we have many months ahead of us before spring arrives. So, we'd like to keep this topic on the surface, but we understand town meeting is going to take precedence. So anytime after that would be fine with us, I'm sure.
Okay, I'm putting it in my calendar for the week after to remind Travis if he hasn't already put it on the agenda for the 25th. So yes, we'll make sure we get to it. Thank you for your patience on that one.
Thank you.
Nice to see you both. Adam, did you have a comment?
I did not. I think Deb articulated everything perfectly.
Okay, thank you. My only public comments, and then I'll go back to the Zoom call, was I confirmed with our DPW superintendent, Sean Reese, that the Complete Streets Tier 3 application was submitted on Friday, which is great. And I bring that up because it's related to the article that's happening in the warrant. Those two had been tethered together, so we're making good progress, and now we just sit back and wait. I think we had a good application, good project list to put forward, and very optimistic that we'll hear good news in time. So that's my only update. Anybody else in the room, or, yep, okay, so I've got a hand up in the room.
Hold it for.
Okay, I see nobody on the Zoom call. Chief Cassidy.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight a recent training that occurred on Thursday at the high school. That was a joint training between the school department, the police department, and fire department. And this is something that we have done for several years now. And there were about 30 key leaders from those three departments that were in attendance. And it was an opportunity for us not only to build relationships and to baseline language and terminology and expanded communication opportunities, but also an opportunity for us to walk through some scenarios and how it is that we would manage incidents that would occur in town. Again, I don't want to go into too much in the weeds of what we were discussing in terms of scenario-based training, but this is something that we have done jointly in spring of 18, fall of 18, fall of 19. We fortunately had to take some time off because of the worldwide public health crisis, but we were able, even with changes in personnel at several departments, which was great for us to be able to introduce people face to face, because we want to make sure that when there is an incident involving schools, that that's not the time that shift supervisors or building administrators are introducing themselves. So it was a great opportunity, and it just highlights the collaboration that occurs on a day-to-day basis between and among departments.
Was the superintendent or assistant superintendent able to attend?
Oh, yes, both assistant superintendents, the superintendent, the new director of equity, building principals, assistant principals, SSA, chiefs, lieutenants, sergeants, SROs, chief, deputy, captains. So it was, again, these are the people that are likely going to be key decision makers in handling any school-based emergency.
Well, thank you for that effort.
Sure.
Right, I see no other callers with comments, so we're going to move on to comments from the town administrator.
Thank you very much. For the first time in quite a while, we don't have anything on the agenda tonight as related to town meeting. I'm going to pull up why that is, which is that if you go to the town's website, scroll down right here, special town meeting, and you can find the warrant document, which was posted last Friday. We're trying to get this out as early as possible for people to review. Obviously, what you don't see here yet is the Finance Committee recommendations, which will come after their vote tomorrow night, but this is on the website. You can view that through the main page, and then also at any point to see it in context, you can go to town meetings. Annual town meetings are all posted here, and then special town meetings down below, and find that warrant. So that is posted. I would say next week we may have an agenda item back regarding town meeting, but it would probably be about the logistics of the meeting and those types of things, unless there's anything else specifically the board would be looking for next week.
And when you say next week, you're talking about Tuesday, October 12th, because we are not meeting. It is a federal holiday. It's a holiday on the 11th. Okay. Travis, I had a thought for you. What were you just talking about? The warrant. Whew. I recall last week at the Finance Committee meeting that they were waiting for a little bit more information, either from us through you or from you. Does the Finance Committee have what they need for tomorrow night? They're not waiting on anything from us. There were a couple small items. I don't think it came back to the select board. I think you said that if there were
There's
tweaks.
2 items on capital. One was a policy related to the
That's right, yeah.
cameras that has been delivered by your public safety officials or IT director for review of the select board. If you're comfortable, I can certainly send that to them at this point. But what I had let them know was that that draft would be in place. The other item is the itemized list of HVAC needs from the school, which is also in the capital item list. I confirmed with the assistant superintendent that he's working with the consultant that he had hoped to have that last Friday. And has not provided that yet, but he's working diligently on it. Those are the 2 pieces of information I believe that they're referring to.
Okay. Yeah, John.
Just real quickly, I'm glad you brought that up, Tina. 2 items. I believe when we discussed the schools project when they were with us, there were a few layers to that ask. One of them was you have active quotes or estimates concerning what these rooftop units would cost. So the quotes or the updated estimate of that cost is welcome. And I believe we also asked the schools to collaborate with the town facility manager to determine or help us understand as a community is it a good idea to put $500,000 worth of rooftop units on a 20-year-old roof? And if so, or if not, what's the pros and cons? Because I think when people vote on that, they need to have their eyes wide open, so that if there's roof failure, 2 to 3 years, you have to spend money to bring a crane in, they understand we asked the question. So I think I wanted more from the schools to collaborate with our resource to make sure that we get an idea of what condition the roof is as we monitor that cost. So there were 2 layers to that.
Yeah,
And on the policy, I've heard a lot about what the finance committee's been asking about regarding that policy. I have no problem sharing it with them. Personally, I think it's overreach by their board to be requesting that kind of a policy to be in place before and if they approved or signed off on it for the warrant. It's a policy that frankly is an administrative task that I think falls within our realm. I don't oppose what they're asking for, but it seems to be a condition upon which they would vote on. So just in terms of boundaries, again, I thought that was overreach. Those are my remarks. Thank you.
The policy though was going back to town council, correct? He has not, I don't believe he's had a chance to review it. He's kept him busy since.
No, and my discussion to that point with the finance committee was simply that the policy, I agree that the policy should be in place and worked on at the time that those cameras go up. And that we would be pursuing that. There was no guarantee that everybody will agree on what that policy says, because at the end of the day, it's, if the select board approves it, that's who's approving that policy. And that the town council's review of it is, from my perspective, the most important thing at this stage
Right.
before it gets a final vote from you. So that's where I am with that. As it relates to the facilities manager on the school request, I think where I am at the moment is the feedback from the facilities managers based on the HVAC needs of the schools to make sure that the way that article is written in the capital budget allows for that to be HVAC needs that are not specific to rooftop units, but could include rooftop units. And that conversation actually came out in the capital subcommittee meeting chaired by Vin Murphy. And I believe that was the right call there. And so I take that and I understand that was also part of the request from the board.
So Travis, I would ask that the policy not be released. And if we need to speak up at town meeting to the effect of the policy will be reviewed. It is currently in draft form with town council, and the select board will review the policy and eventually approve a policy. If that needs to be said at town meeting, I think any one of the 3 of us would be comfortable standing up to say that. I don't think it should be released at this point where we don't have feedback yet from town council. So I'd ask to hold that back.
Okay.
Thank you.
On the LRRP, which is the Local Rapid Response Planning Program, the consultant Nelson Nygaard, who was provided to us with technical assistance through the state grant program, is wrapping up their report on recommendations in the downtown through Blair Square area of town. So downtown, in the Central Street corridor to Blair Square, is the village commercial district that they looked at, which was the purview of the grant. They also will be providing some information from the subject matter experts that they were allowed to tap through the grant funding, which was beta on the possibility of wastewater treatment plant for the downtown area. That's been discussed a few different areas, including ARPA steering, including the EDC, a letter from a resident. And so we should have more information on that. The final report is due October 8th, so within the week. And at this point, they were just asking for the initial group who met with them, which is the EDC, HCAT, the town, on any feedback, and then that report will become public. But very, very much looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a great asset to a number of groups. Envisioning Future Holliston, I think it'll be an asset to the select board, obviously, the Economic Development Committee, and the ARPA steering group as well. So that should be, by the time we meet next, we'll have that final report. Additionally, just to keep updating where we are with it, which is the dams, the select board specifically been looking for more progress after we got back in compliance on the dams. The work Lenard was doing, we sat down, we put together a working group that includes a couple of our friends from the Concom who have some expertise, and we decided to go ahead with a cost benefit analysis on 3 possible outcomes for 4 dams. We do have the first quote in, we're expecting 2 more, and then we'd like to move ahead. And then as expected, and just to sort of firm up what we discussed previously, there should not be additional funding needs above what we have currently available to us. So once we have all those quotes, we will select the vendor and bring that to you for approval. Lastly, we will be speaking with Mass DOT as it relates to information, looking to tap the previous transportation bond bill, working through the Rep. Dykeman's office, Senator Spoko's office. So just initial conversations on that, and then also obviously getting in front of them the data that we have available to us, which is the Stantec report, which highlights a number of state-owned roadway needs and sidewalk needs, and then the complete streets, which additionally also has a number of state-owned roadway projects listed in it. So I will report back on that. But again, in the past year, they have been very accommodating, sitting down with us, providing information to us, and I'm sure they will be now that we have significantly more data to present them.
And Travis, I'm just gonna thank those from last year because there's a lot of groundwork made last year to get that first meeting. And I hope residents know that this is momentum that's building. And it's gonna take time, but we're where we are tomorrow because of what happened a year ago. And so a year from now, we'll be in a much different place too. So those that were involved in getting last year's site walks, site visits together and having this done with DOT, many thanks to them. Happy to be where we are tomorrow.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Travis. Any questions or comments for the town administrator? Okay, so we're going to move on then to review of vacant seats on committees. Travis, I think you wanted to provide this. Or would you like me to read through this?
So we've done this periodically. I just want to show people we're trying, and we can push this out as many ways as possible. But at the end of the day, I think it's a consistency too. Make sure people understand. This community relies very heavily on volunteers to do a variety of things. If you go to the town clerk's website, we are the IT director working with the town clerk to make sure that we have this as updated as possible. Go down on the left, go to committee vacancies. You can see which groups in town are currently in need that have vacancies. So, there's a couple new ones on here, and this is relatively dynamic. There's one I would mention, historical commission will have later on this evening, but has 3 vacancies of a 7-member group. Actually just reached quorum with an appointment about a week ago. So all these are on here, and if anybody's interested, if anybody wants information, you can reach out to my office, you can reach out to the town clerk's office. But a couple of different ways to get involved in town other than sort of putting your name on the ballot. All these groups are looking for really volunteer support and interest from the community. So I just wanted to make sure we get that out there. Holliston Reporter has been very good about sharing out that list for us periodically. And every time we do, we get a couple more interested parties. So just going to consistently do that.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to board business. First up is a community farm haunted walk on October 30th. From 5 to 9. Chris, I see you on the call. I don't know if you wanted to speak on this one. You hung in there if this is what you were waiting for. So I do want to recognize you and give you that opportunity.
I appreciate that, Tina. Hi, Chris Westland, 103 Norfolk Street. I gave Ben like an overview of the haunted walk. It's pretty much what we've done in the past, but it's been a while since we've been able to do it. So it would be the 4th annual one. It would be a walk, not a ride. Proceeds go to the Friends of the Community Farm. And we have obviously the police permit, the police chief approved the permit. So we were just seeing if you guys would give it your blessing.
I think that's wonderful. So it was actually 2018 was the last one because 2019 was EEE.
Correct.
20 was what it was. So really briefly, are there any significant updates to the farm that you want to share with the community to draw them in so that they're taking another look in 2021?
Oof, from 2018, that's a tough one, Tina.
More beautiful flowers, more green space.
What was that?
More beautiful flowers, more green space, and the same smiling, happy people.
Exactly. In a bigger garden plot area since 2018, I think.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
So that's October 30th from 5 to 9, and it is a significant fundraiser for the community farm. So you are looking for a motion to approve the event.
Motion to approve the community farm haunted walk on October 30th, 2021, from 5 PM to 9 PM.
Second that motion?
By the way, I presume this is at the community farm.
Yes,
That's true, but
yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Good luck, Chris.
Thank you very much.
And we have a Halloween Rail Trail, October 31st, 2021, but what, I'm reading half of it. So this is for an event on the Upper Charles Rail Trail, beginning of Blair Square, going down to the first bridge, and I'm assuming, hold on one second, please. This is run by the Holliston Newcomers Club. And it's not a true parade, but an outdoor event that again will start in Blair Square and go down to the first bridge there at Exchange. So for October 31st, Halloween itself, 10 to noon.
motion to approve.
Motion, we have a second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have meeting minutes from September 13th, 2021.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 13th. 2020.
All in favor? Aye,
Aye.
that carries. Okay, we have executive session meetings. I believe everyone's had a chance to review and submit edits. Travis confirmed that today. So we are looking to approve the minutes of July 12th and September 27th of 21, but hold for release due to pending ongoing content relevant to executive session. So I'll entertain that motion in a minute. The second motion will be to approve the July 19th, 2021 meetings, but release them on November 1st, timed to the probation period ending of our new hire. Oh, that's not,
No, it's the higher.
excuse me, hire. So we have two motions that I'm looking for, one for the 12th of July.
Okay, I'll make the motion to approve the executive session meeting minutes of July 12th, 2021 and September 27th, 2021, and not released.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries.
I'll make a motion to approve the executive session meeting minutes of July 19th, 2021 for release no sooner than November 1st, 2021.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Thank you. All right, so we have a rate adjustment for the 2021-2022 snow and ice contract. Contractor, I have it on good authority that the acorns are falling early, so it's gonna be a bad winter. So this is probably, the squirrels do talk
Farmer's
to me.
almanac.
My morning conversations with the squirrels. No, so we're looking to, in all seriousness, we're looking to increase the rates for our snow and ice contractors. Looks like roughly in the ballpark of 6 to 10% of a rate increase, with the exception of the snow shoveler. It's like hard work, so. That one. So again, a rate increase for this upcoming snow and ice contractor.
You want to pull it up on the screen?
Yeah,
just to-
yeah.
So we looked at the neighboring communities. We're seeing quite a few of them out there pushing, make sure that everybody gets the contractors lined up this winter. That's one of our biggest concerns. For context of the rate changes there on the right, this was not done in the last 2 winters, which is why we're looking at sort of more than just minimal on the snow shovelers. We don't see a lot of response to that, and we're trying to attract those. I think from just a base number perspective on what we're looking at, it's probably going to cost the town an additional 15,000 to 20,000 if we see our average use of storms, our average storm experience of the last 3 years based on this. But it also is going to allow us to make sure that we're attracting the contractors, we're getting the contractors to respond, and that's going to, our residents will appreciate that.
Well, no one wants to see something go up in cost, of course, but this is a perfect example of looking around to surrounding communities and seeing what's happening and taking proactive rather than reactive steps. So I appreciate it. Thank you for bringing this before the board. So I will entertain a motion to make the adjustments. You gave me the motion. You have it there, Travis? John,
I think John has it.
I have it here as well. I'm sorry.
I'll just make the adjustment to approve the snow and ice contractor rate adjustments for 2021, 2022 as indicated by the town administrator.
Second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, got it. Good. Okay, we have a temporary construction easement related to the 9 Green Street demolition, so we're looking for a motion to authorize the town administrator with town council to finalize the temporary site access and construction agreements for the demo of 9 Green Street.
You have the correct updated information in the motion, with Jay Talman looked at the information we got from PAR. Did not want the word easement as a different understanding of that, but this is really you authorizing me and Jay to work with those individuals that may be impacted to find the right outcome here and move ahead with demolition.
So I will entertain a motion to authorize town administrator with town council to finalize temporary site access and construction agreements. Demolition of 9 Green Street.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have a senior center donation from Ann Mahaney.
We have a senior center donation totaling $100 to account number 285541-45373. Named the Metropolitan Area Planning Council Taxi Grant. This is a taxi grant donation from Ann Mahaney. I'll make a motion to accept that as stated.
I'll second that with a thank you.
All in favor? Aye. Carries, thank you. We are getting to the bottom here. We have an appointment to the Historical Commission. We have Mary Greendale, who has graciously offered to serve in a volunteer capacity on the Historical Commission, and a term that would expire June, a one-year term, no? Under 1 year, June 2022. So I'm looking for a motion to appoint Mary Greendale to the Historical Commission for a 1-year term.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then our final item here is a 1-day beer and wine license for Crafted on October 17th.
This is for the Fall Fest to be held October 17th at 45 Chestnut Street between the hours of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Cheers. Okay, and that's it for other business. Sorry, that's it for board business. John, do you have any other business?
2 announcements, Tina. First, the first of several reminders as we head into the fall and winter months. Winter parking ban will be in place. This is a reminder: no on-street parking in the town of Holliston between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. from November 1st through November 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. All vehicles will be ticketed and towed. The second announcement is regarding the fall curbside leaf pickup. E.L. Harvey will be picking up leaves at curbside the week of November 29th, 2021. All leaves must be in compostable bags or loose in trash barrels. Plastic bags will not be accepted. All leaves must be at curbside by 6 a.m. on your designated trash pickup day. Any questions, please call the Select Board's office, 508-429-0608. Marshall Street Recycling Center is also open Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Travis, real quickly, we talked at one point about expanding the Marshall Street hours. Can you confirm what we have right now? I don't want to put you on the spot. Did that change, or are we still dealing with the 1 day a week?
At this point, we haven't been able to, once that balance begins to build in the new fund, then we can revisit it. But right now, we can support consistently doing additional things.
We approach the fall, and anything we can do to provide that service beyond Saturdays, 8 to 3, I think would be beneficial to the citizens, but also be that capable hands to achieve. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Nope, nothing.
This does not need to be announcing at all. You mentioned the LRRP final report. In that report, I recall mention of zoning bylaw changes, updates, edits. After town meeting, I think that would be an interesting thing to discuss at this board. Next steps to sort of initiate a process that looks at zoning and general bylaw edits, maybe collecting recommendations from staff. Having never sat through one of these before, I don't know what it looks like, but it comes up every now and again that perhaps we should have a look at zoning or bylaw, standing general bylaws, and consider edits. Specifically thinking of the, again, LRRP final report. So not a now thing. Doing that because we were talking about that report earlier. And if it belongs in the envisioning Holliston committee, then that's fine too. But
We'll rope it in when we start looking at what data is available.
All right, so seeing no other business, I will entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:16 p.m.
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
See you next week, Holliston. Have a good night.